What is up, you guys, and welcome back to this bonus episode. Last time I talked all about how parental wounds may still be impacting you today. And today I thought that maybe it would be helpful to go through a couple of vows or intentions we can do as parents or caregivers in any way so that our children can flourish without our woundings being passed on to them. Now, it's important to understand that likely we are doing things unconsciously all the time. We may never know how deep our own wounds go, but if we can be intentional about trying to raise the young ones in our lives as best as possible in the best way that we know how, then I think that could be of enormous benefit to, subsequent generations. This is how we stop cycles, right? This is how we break that pattern. I also wanted to say that although I am specifically talking about parenting in this episode, you can apply this to any person you impact in your life. Anybody who is, a child, you may be an aunt, an uncle, or even have friends who have children. You also may be a friend of somebody who is a parent, so this could help you there. You may have children in your life in any way, or even if you're just a boss in some way and you affect somebody who is still an adult, but you have influence over. I think that applies here too. So it can be applied, across the board very symbolically. So I hope you guys enjoy this episode. It's a little shorter, but I think it's some good food for thought. And without further ado, welcome to the Get Out of Your Head podcast, where we talk all about the stories that keep you stuck, blocked from manifesting what you really want, and away from your authentic life. I am your host, Sarah, from Spirit, Mind, Body. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. If you did not listen to the last episode that I did this whole episode about how we have inherited some parental wounds, probably. These are ways, and I say parental, but really it's parental, caregivers, our teachers, anybody in authority. There is a great responsibility that comes with that. And when we were children, we tended to see people in authority or authority figures as sort of these godlike, all-knowing figures. And we had a hard time seeing their imperfections. And my last episode was kind of bringing some of those imperfections to light. It was saying that whether conscious or not, usually it's unconscious, but we have these patterns, toxic patterns that our parents may or may not have done. And I kind of categorize them, and they leave lasting wounds on us. And that's really the thing. We have to be willing to have these conversations, even though they're hard and they're difficult to deal with and we don't really like them, because that's how we move through them. That's how we become more awake. And that's how we do it better for our kids. So this episode is all about how can you do it better for your kids. I just have an intro, and then I have 4 things that, maybe are like food for thought, 4 things that you can do to keep in the back of your mind on a day-to-day basis for your children. So even as parents or caregivers, this episode is for anybody who is involved in a child's life. You could be a parent, you could be a teacher, you could have nieces or nephews or a babysitter or anybody you have in your life who is a child. Can you allow the advice or the ideas in this episode to translate to the people in your life? This is how we show people unconditional love. This is how we show people that they're okay being who they are and that we accept them for who they are. And in doing so, the more we accept ourselves for who they are, the more that we are able to accept somebody else for who they are, and vice versa. There's a little disclaimer at the beginning of this. We are not going to get it perfect 100% of the time. If you don't know, this is where I'm coming from. This is my spot in life right now. I am a parent. I am a mother of 2 little kids. I have a 2.5-year-old and I have a 1-year-old. And I think that it's important that every time that I don't get it perfect, but I recognize that I haven't gotten it perfect, I make a point to go to my children and either apologize or say, I did this, but I didn't mean to do that, and ask for their genuine forgiveness. And even my 1-year-old, who, he doesn't talk in full sentences yet. My 2-year-old talks in full sentences, but she doesn't understand big concepts. And sometimes I wonder how much she really absorbs. It's still important to do this. It's important for me, most importantly for my own soul healing, because when I lapse into unconscious patterns, because I don't want to say when I mess up, I guess you could say when you mess up, but messing up almost implies that it's conscious. And I think that more often than not, I'm messing up because I'm overworked, I'm overstressed, I haven't gotten a break, my husband's gone, there's a lot of things going on, I've got a sick kid, or I haven't gotten a lot of sleep. And when that happens, I have a higher tendency of yelling or being emotionally unavailable or being checked out or not being present for my kids. And so I don't like to say that it's messing up, but when I do those things and I recognize that's not the person that I wanted to be, that wasn't the parent that I saw myself being, that's not the highest version of parent that I could be for my children, I do make a point to come to my children and atone for that. Sorry, that was a big long tangent. Even though my kids don't understand it, I think they do pick up energetically on what's happening. And in doing that, I become a role model for my children. And so when I recognize, I'm demonstrating to them that we're not going to get it right 100% of the time. And when we don't get it right, the best we do is to recognize that to somebody else and then move forward. And through that, there is vulnerability, and vulnerability will connect us. I think that that's what builds relationship. When I look at my kids and I say, okay, well, what kind of relationship do I want to have with them? It's not one that's detached where I'm sitting on a mighty throne and I'm controlling their every behavior. I want to know my kids, man. Like, I want to have that, bond. I want them to come to me for the things when they're in distress. I want them to come to me for good times, for bad times. That's the kind of relationship that I want to have. And so maybe that's a really good question for you. Wherever you are, whether you're a parent, I'm just going to, roll with this as a parent-child, but, apply your situation here. Caregiver, role model, aunt, uncle, whatever applies to you. But whatever relationship you want to have with that child in your life, ask yourself, what do you want that to look like? And then from there, can you do your best to always be on that course? And when you're not, recognize it and come back to that course. There's a tendency that when we fall short, especially if you have this in you, to get really down on yourself and to kind of beat yourself up for doing that. And certainly that's a tendency that I have had. But I think that when we beat ourselves up for falling short, quote unquote, from the parent that we want to be or falling off the path, when we beat ourselves up, really what we do is we put ourselves more into shame and guilt, and that makes us feel even more stressed. And I think that only compounds the problem. So it's important to understand that wherever you are in, your parenting or child rearing journey, to recognize that this is probably one of the hardest jobs that there is out there, and to be gentle with yourself and understand that you're not going to get it right 100% of the time. And I was reading in a book, there's a phrase that was coined by D.W. Winnicott that says the good enough parent. And I think that's something that we all could take with us. Am I good enough? Am I present enough? Am I caring enough? Do I love them enough? And if we carry this idea of perfection, like we have to be perfect, what kind of signal are we sending to our kids? What do they pick up on? They're picking up on, well, my mom's always perfect, and so I have to be perfect too. And that's not what's going to lead to genuine connection. It's through our imperfections that we can connect. And I can't emphasize that enough. It's through our imperfections that we build a relationship. Brene Brown has a really good, I think it's just on Audible, but it's called The Gifts of Imperfect Parenting. And it makes me cry every time because it's about heart-led parenting. It's about just being present. The only way that you're missing it is if you're not present. And there are days that I come home from work and I'm not present because I'm on my phone or because I'm checked out or because I am just generally like in my own head. And I would say that that's not present, but when I recognize it, that's the willingness to try, the willingness to recognize when we're not there and to get back on the path. So with that lengthy introduction, I have 4 things for you to consider as you go through your parenting or role modeling journey with kids or even with anybody else in your life. And I think that these things, if we're considering them on a constant basis, or if we're considering them over and over and over again, they're going to lead us to a place where we can get a little closer to unconditional love, where we can get a little closer to real intimacy with our children or with whoever we're dealing with. So, can you make a vow to do these things? First off, to allow your kid's soul to flourish. Can you allow them to shoulder and handle frustrations as growth opportunities? The ego wants comfort. The soul always wants growth. And you have to get in touch with yourself here, because here's the thing. We have this tendency as parents to want to do it for them, to take away suffering, to take away struggle, to take away all of that. But through struggle is always going to be meaning. Through struggle is always going to be something worthwhile. I did it. That pride of, hey, that was really hard and I did it anyway. I don't think there's anything more rewarding than seeing my child struggle and then also overcome. Seeing her work very, very hard on something and then get it. That pride that she has after she's tried and tried and tried and then finally she gets it is really like, that's so rewarding. And I know that's really rewarding for her. And really what it's doing is it's sending her a message that she can do hard things, that she is capable. And if this is with a child, this is great. And I'm talking about children, but even this can be in your workplace with coworkers or with people who work underneath you. Allowing somebody to try and not just gather it up and just do it for them, but to allow them to struggle and work through it and accomplish that. Giving somebody that opportunity, there's nothing more rewarding to them than that. Another piece to consider here is, are you treating your kids with dignity and respect, or do you see them as unruly, naughty, or people to be managed? Listen, children have really low impulse control. Children are not capable, their mental capacity is not able to handle their emotions. They don't have the actual biological machinery to do certain things. This is something that I've had to change my language around, and that I have had to really take a different viewpoint. But your kids are not, like my kids are not being naughty when she's getting into something. Could you see that as she's being curious? Could you see that as they're exploring, they're wondering about the world, and that texture is so different than any other texture than I've ever felt before. And so yeah, it makes a mess, but it's not because they're, looking to get into trouble or to disobey you. It's because they are being explorers and they're being curious. And isn't that the kind of person you want to raise? Don't you want to raise somebody who's curious? Whenever I find my child getting into something that I know that I don't want her to get into, that is an indication for me to move it. And that's just the way that I go. I think a lot of people would say, or some people, there's a mindset out there that would say, well, your kid needs to have better impulse control. But my argument to that is that until they're, I want to say like 6 or 7, until they're 6 or 7, they don't have the prefrontal cortex is not developed enough in order for them to say, hey, stop doing that. And even past that, teenagers, I want to say it's not until they're like 25 that we actually have good impulse control to say, okay, well, I'm going to see the long-term consequences and say that might not be worth it. So having that mindset of your kids are not naughty, they're just being explorers. And that, I think that helps you talk to your kids with dignity and respect. The other thing is, if your kid is talking back to you, kids are sponges. The question is that I think that is really helpful here is, how do you talk to your kids first off? If I find my child talking to me in a way that I don't like, that's my first indication to check myself and say, okay, how am I talking to her? And that's not to let your child off the hook. It's not to say, okay, let's just perpetuate this. But I think that a really helpful thing here could be to recognize, I understand that you're frustrated, but it's not okay for us to talk to each other like that. And I know maybe I've talked to you like that in the past, but I'm going to promise right now that I'm going to do my best not to talk to you like that in the future. And so I would like you to not talk to me like that right now. And I think that that's a good way to get on the same page and move forward together. Okay, the second thing that I have is, can you vow to allow your child the permission to follow their bliss? Allow them to lead by their own interests and their own curiosities down whatever road they want to travel. I think it's really a natural tendency as parents to be like, okay, but especially nowadays when we're in this hyper productive, hyper competitive world, we want, our child to learn their ABCs by the time they're 3, to learn how to count by the time they're 3, because we're always keeping up with whose child is smarter, whose child's more capable. And so, you guys have heard it like helicopter parenting, or this idea that, you have to be giving your child stimulation and they have to be learning at every moment of the day. Children learn through play, and they actually learn better through play. And if you take play out of it and you force them rote memorization and all of these things, and you steer them down a path, you're just cramming them into a mold. And my question to you is, did you like being crammed into a mold when you were a child? You're probably on this path of undoing all of these things because your parents forced you into a mold. And so by not allowing them to follow their own interests and not allowing them to follow their own bliss, aren't we passing that on to them? Aren't we forcing them into our mold, right? And this is exactly what Carl Jung is talking about when he says the greatest burden a child must carry is the unlived life of the parent. Wherever you have stopped growing, wherever you have adopted that mindset, that's what you're passing on to your child. Okay, the third one is, can you make a vow to model a larger, more soul-driven life? Are you walking the walk? Are you doing the work? Or are you paralyzed by your own fear? Being the model is the first, maybe this should be the first point. Being the model for what you want your child to do is the best way to parent. Being the model of who you want your kid to be. You want your kid to be respectful. Are you being respectful to them? You want your kid to be curious. You want your kid to read? Do you read yourself? You want your kid to stop watching so much TV? Well, how much TV are you watching? Our kids are literally absorbing and seeing everything that we do. And that's the best way to parent, I think. That's like leading from the front. That's parenting by example. Are you following your own path, or at least trying? It's one thing to have dreams of what you'll do someday, and it's a totally different thing to live it out and walk the walk. And it's harder than it looks. To be honest, when I have an income and security and healthcare and a job that provides all of that, and I have little mouths to feed and a mortgage to pay, it's not that easy to leave the income and security in order to follow my dreams. But can I make a little bit of effort? Can I take time aside for myself every single day or every single week? Or can I have a very specific time that I do my own thing because that's what my soul calls me to do? That small effort, and that's what they'll pick up on. Even if you do it during their nap time, or even if you do it when they're not seeing it, modeling that is something that they will pick up on. Kids are way more intuitive and way more perceptive than we would ever know. And this is also why it's really important to analyze what your own beliefs are. If you're telling yourself that doing any kind of creative work is only worthwhile if you're making money, or your own values are in misguided things, external things like, money, status, that's what they're picking up on. So it's really important that you analyze what your own values and what your own beliefs are. I also think that it's important, by modeling a larger, more soul-driven life, to prioritize yourself and prioritize self-care. And that is, I'm talking to you as a mother of 2 little ones. My husband travels upwards of 70% of the time. I understand how very, very difficult it is to prioritize self-care. Okay, but here's the thing. There is always time for self-care, and we have to come back to what really fuels us. If watching TV doesn't really fuel us, but it's the easy way to like kind of numb out or make ourselves feel comfortable. And then we spend an hour or two every day watching TV, or even an hour or two every week, whatever you have. Well, is that really self-care? And am I prioritizing my time in the way that I want to? And what I would say here is that journaling, knowing what really fuels you, what really fills back up your cup, and visualizing your day in the way that you want it to go are all very important things. When you can visualize your day, you can sort of plan for your self-care. You can plan to set aside time to do what really fills you. If that's reading, then you can plan to wake up early, or to do it during your kids' nap time, or to even set aside time and say, okay, everybody is reading silently right now and we're all doing this together. Then you can sort of plan for it. But visualizing it is a really good way to make sure that you pre-plan for that, instead of falling into default easy ways of getting comfortable or numbing out or doing things that feel good but don't actually fill you up. Does that make sense? Okay, the fourth and final thing I have is, can you make a vow to do your best, to be conscious enough to recognize your own fears and deal with them so as not to impart these limitations on your children? Your own fears will paralyze your children if they go unaddressed. If I'm afraid of failing a sport or something like that, and that is a really deep thing, that's probably going to show up as a projection onto my child, and I'm never going to get my kid into sports, even though that might be their soul calling. And so it's really important to address that fear and own your fear as your own, and then make moves to start conquering that fear. I think that the overarching message through all of this, though, is the more you do hard things, the more you see struggles as opportunities, and the more you are unafraid of dealing with those challenges, the better you're going to be at dealing with them, the better you're going to be at facing them and being unafraid to overcome it and to become better because of it. The more you see struggle as not a bad thing, and to be very, very aware of what you label as bad, and ask yourself, is it really bad? And can I see the good in it? The more you're able to do that, the more you're going to be able to allow your kids to do that as well. And so with all of these things, I think that it's a good thing to step back and take a second and to say, am I allowing my kids to do this? Am I allowing my kids to flourish? Am I allowing them permission to follow their bliss? Am I modeling the life that I want them to live, the people that I want them to be? Am I parenting myself enough first before I parent my kids? And am I conscious enough to recognize my own fears and deal with them so that I don't put that on them, so that I don't project that on them and then cap their potential because of my own insecurity? I hope that this episode was helpful to you. I hope that whether you're a parent yourself, whether you are not a parent and you're just a caregiver, or even if you just have influence over somebody else's life, the most important thing to recognize and to understand is that healing starts with you. And the more you heal, the more that you can be more emotionally available for somebody else. The more you can, live a larger life yourself, and then, give that to somebody else. We're always impacting the people that we're around. We're always in relationship with people that we're around. Hurt people. As much as you're hurting, you're unconsciously going to hurt somebody else. You're going to have a tendency to unconsciously hurt somebody else. And so taking that back and owning that yourself and doing the best you can to heal yourself is the best gift that you can do for anybody else, especially our children, which is the most important because that's the next generation, right? Those are the people we're handing this world to. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you next time. If you enjoyed this episode, I would invite you to subscribe, share it with someone you know, and leave an honest rating or review. You can also connect with me through Instagram at spiritmind.body, through YouTube, or my website. Links to all of these can be found in the show notes below. This work is not easy and requires tremendous self-reflection, grit, and a willingness to be misunderstood, and for that, I honor every single one of you for showing up for your authentic self. Until next time.